Man, he does an amazing job covering the Eagles for PHLY or allphly.com. Always love his work. He and Bo Wolf doing an amazing show. You got to read him. You got to watch him. You got to listen to him. You got to follow him on social media. Zack Berman, the great Zachariah. What do you say, pal?
Anthony, good to see you.
Good to see you, buddy. How's your book coming?
I appreciate you asking. It's coming along really well. It comes out in September. The publisher will have an announcement the next few weeks, hopefully. But it goes to bed at the end of the month here. So it's been a fun process. Eager to get it out and eager for people to read it.
Tell people the premise.
Yeah, so it's a curated history of the last 25 years of the Eagles. So it's not a full history. It's kind of selected narratives of different players, different moments. You get into the backstories of the coaches, the quarterbacks, the executives from this era, some of the great games, and it kind of leans more, frankly, toward the past 15 years. But it covers from the start of the McNabb-Reed era to the past year.
It's great. I cannot wait for it. It's going to be fantastic. Very excited for you. Nothing better than putting, whether it's a book, screenplay, whatever it is, when you're done and you put it to bed, having written is the greatest feeling in the world.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think actually that's it in my acknowledgments that it's better to have written than it is to write. So it's an arduous process when you do it, as you well know, because actually I'll tell your listeners, part of the research of the book included reading again Sunday Pilgrimage, which I would tell everyone, whether, if you're a young Eagles fan and you want to know about that great 2014, Anthony took you behind the scenes there. But the foreword of that book was written by Andy Reid, and there was an anecdote there that actually leads my Andy Reid chapter about Andy Reid's first dinner in Philadelphia. I thought it was an awesome anecdote that really kind of showed what Andy was getting into at the start in '99.
Yeah, he's the best. Thanks, buddy. That's awesome. So let's talk about the new chapter in Eagles history, and that, of course, 2 new coordinators. And I was making the point early in the show. I love assistant coaches. I don't know about you, but like they're the guys that the kind of lean on father figures. When the head coach has to be the CEO, the assistants and the coordinators are able to be more of the father figure, the teacher, and I like the grizzled veteran. So let's talk about Vic Fangio first.
Yeah, I think you put it well, and I heard you and JP speaking before I came on, and you explained it there. What the Eagles did was they hired a baseline, right? They hired someone where you gave the analogy of Jim Johnson with Andy Reid, and that's what it is. This is not the young coordinator. This is not Jonathan Gannon in his first time as coordinator. This is not Sean Desai, a young guy who only had 1 year of experience as the coordinator. Vic Fangio's done this for 4 decades, and you might not get top of the league performance, but what you're hiring is someone who has a track record of consistent defenses. There's going to be order to it. He knows how to use the personnel. He's still figuring out some of it. But I think what you're going to see is Nick Sirianni's not going to have to worry about the defensive side of the ball. I remember well when Doug Peterson hired Jim Schwartz, and the first time talking to Doug about it, and Doug said Jim's the head coach of the defense, right? And he meant that respectfully. I actually think Doug kind of got knocked a bit at the time for saying that. But that's what it was. It was so Doug could oversee the team, oversee the offense, and Jim Schwartz handled the defense. And that's what you're getting with Vic Fangio. He's the head coach of the defense.
Yeah, look, that's what Andy does with Spags in Kansas City. Like Spags does the entire work on defense. They have a meeting on Friday for an hour, and that's it. Like, Andy wants to know about what's your game plan? All right, cool. I saw something. You'll exchange. Maybe Andy saw something that Spag could up Spags, exploit, the opponent while he was watching film. And really, that's really it. I mean, they're completely in charge of that side of the ball. Let's talk Vic's scheme. All right. It's interesting because, you talk about Gannon and you talk about Desai and that piece of it. It's now you get the creator, like one of the originals of that scheme, which I always think is best and can be more effective. How do you view that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, you no longer have the imitator, right? You have the original, and that's what it is. And something Vic said yesterday was that even though there's been a lot of different versions of his defense that other people have run, he kind of adds his own wrinkles to it, and it's continuing to evolve. And obviously, the personnel is going to have a lot to do with it. But I think you're going to see a lot of the principles that you saw when he was running Chicago's defense, when he was running Denver's defense, when he was running San Francisco's defense last year in Miami. Now, the thing that I got to mention is you think about, so when I think of Vic, I think of those great 49ers defenses under Harbaugh, right? And they had Patrick Willis and they had Navarro Bowman in the middle of the field. And they had Justin Smith on the interior, and they had Aldon Smith coming around the edge. You think about the Bears defense when Matt Nagy was the coach. And the Eagles beat them in the playoffs, but that was like a top of the league defense. They had Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan at linebacker, and they had Khalil Mack coming around the edge, right? So a lot of this has to do with the personnel, but I think what you're getting from a scheme perspective is similar to what he's done in the past. I mean, the linebackers are, or I should say the edge rushers are going to drop here, right? That's part of what he does, but it's done in conjunction with the rest of the pass rush. I don't think it's going to look like Hassan Reddick in Seattle last year when he's dropping and it doesn't really make sense with the rest of the defense, right? So I think there's really going to be order to all three levels, and they're going to work together. And I think what the Eagles have done on the back end is particularly going to help Vic this year.
Oh, yeah, in a big way. So you know how we are, right? Like our favorite defensive coordinator in the history of DC's is Jim Johnson, right? Because we loved the array of blitzes, blitzing obviously Dawkins at safety. He would blitz his corners. This scheme's a little different. Yeah. So juxtapose Fangio's scheme, right, and the pressure situation, because we're always screaming blitz, blitz, pressure.
Yep. Yeah, I think those who want that are probably going to be a little disappointed because that's not the way Vic plays.
Right.
And, he has the shell coverage that you're seeing kind of in vogue around the NFL. He wants to limit explosive plays. But, there's different ways to blitz. And the thing is, and this almost by definition, a blitz is when you're sending more than four pass rushers, right? So they're gonna have five guys rushing at times. It just might not be the safety. It might not be the corner, And Jim Johnson and Spags and Sean McDermott, they had their own way of doing it, and it was great. It's not what you're hiring Vic Fangio to do. You're not hiring Vic to run Jim Johnson's defense. But I think if they can generate a pass rush, it's going to have to come from Jalen Carter. It's going to have to come from Bryce Huff. It's going to have to come from Josh Sweat. I don't think it's going to be coming from Reed Blankenship or C.J. Gardner-Johnson rushing as safeties like B-Dog did.
Yeah, and listen, I do think that in today's football that when you got so much speed and weapons that you're facing, that listen, I trust that there are times when pressure is needed. And there's times when not. And when you got a guy like Fangio, he's been through it, right? Like, so he's seen everything. That's the advantage of getting Fangio, is that there's nothing he hasn't seen.
Yeah, and as we talk about blitz, and to that point, Vic's going to coach his players, right? So you have to look at the skill sets of your players. Devin White has been a productive blitzer from the linebacker spot. Nakobe Dean, when he was at Georgia, was a good blitzer. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., when you watched him at Clemson, he could get to the quarterback, right? So it could be the type of thing where you say, all right, you look at the pieces you have and you try to maximize the pieces that you have. So, yeah, I think that's the one thing you have to acknowledge. And Vic said it yesterday when he talked about what makes his scheme work. He said good players. And so what a good coach does is you take a look at who you have. And, look, if they don't have Patrick Willis and they have Navarro Bowman, But instead, they have Devin White and Nakobe Dean. Then what you do is you look at the guys you have and you find a way to make it work with those guys.
We're talking to Zack Berman. Does such a wonderful job covering the Birds for allphly.com. And, of course, does a great show with Bo Wolf. You got to watch him, listen to him, just read him, everything. This part of the program brought to you by, or the big story brought to you by TrueMark Financial Credit Union. Stop in your local branch. Learn more about the credit union difference at TrueMark today. All right, so let's go to the other side of the ball for a second, and let's talk about Kellen Moore. So what the idea of Kellen Moore that you love, again, is he's done it. He's been a play caller. Like, that's a big deal, right? Especially when we saw last year and Brian Johnson, which, I mean, it became a disaster.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see how this offense looks because you're right, Kellen Moore. You're hiring a credentialed offensive coordinator, right? He's 35 years old, so he's viewed as young, but he's been an OC for 6 years, right? He's called plays for Dak Prescott. He's called plays for Justin Herbert. He's had CeeDee Lamb. He's had Amari Cooper. He's you go on down the list. He's had Zeke Elliott. So he's had successful offenses in the NFL. Now the thing is this. I asked him specifically yesterday, how is it going to look different than what the Eagles have had the past 3 years? And what he said is they can't go away from what worked. You know, that they have evidence of what worked, but they're going to kind of add to that. And whenever I've spoken to Nick Sirianni about this during the past few months, you hear blending these concepts, blending what Kellen Moore's done in the past with what the Eagles have done. And I'm curious to see how that particularly looks, because I think when you hire Kellen Moore, you're hiring Kellen Moore to run Kellen Moore's offense. Now, the offense evolves and you adjust, but you don't want to just put in 20% or 40% of Kellen Moore. You want it to be, this is why you brought him in. This is why they said at the end of the year press conference that the offense got stale last year. You're going to see more motion. You're going to see more disguise. You're going to see more creativity. And I think that has to be kind of the foundation of what they do. So if this is Kellen Moore kind of calling an offense that's not his, I don't think it's worth having Kellen Moore in here. If Kellen Moore is calling the Kellen Moore offense, that's why you brought him in. So yeah, I do expect this to look different. That's not to get away from what they've done and you lean in to Jalen and AJ and Devontae, but you need to embrace Kellen Moore's ideas and his creativity.
What did he learn from the Dallas piece?
Yeah, so the Dallas piece. What was interesting there is I mean, some people might know this, some people don't. Is that he went from being a player to a coach, right? So he was in Dallas. He was their backup quarterback. Then he slides right over to coaching. So there, he's kind of working with all the guys that he played with in the system that he played in. So it was kind of a continuation there. He goes to the Chargers last year, and he's working with different people, right? And I think that's one part of it. The other thing too is the end of the Dallas era. He's working under Mike McCarthy, and Mike McCarthy's different than Jason Garrett, and so he kind of gets a different flavor with Mike McCarthy. So I think he has more experience. He's been exposed to more than for instance, the Eagles interviewed him to be the head coach in Philly after the 2020 season, like when they hired Nick in 2021, and the Eagles were impressed with him then. I know that for a fact. So you're getting a guy now, you're getting a coach now who since then has worked for Mike McCarthy, has worked with Justin Herbert, has been in different situations. And I think it's a different type of coach than he was when he was 31, 32 years old back then.
Yeah, and I throw away the Charger stuff. I mean, that was a disaster. It was a coach on his way out. It was an offense that was depleted, right? I mean, it was kind of difficult, I think, for him to kind of do anything and to make any kind of a mark in it. So I kind of discount what happened last year.
I agree in terms of like the results, but when I look at the experience, you worked with a different type of quarterback, right? You had different personnel, and when I look at coordinators, what I want to know is you're not going to have him and Dak Prescott worked together for so long, right? So there was synergy between the two. I want to see how you do when you're in a different environment. And that's what he was with the Chargers last year. He had exposure to Justin Herbert. He had exposure to a beat up offensive line. He had exposure to Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And if you're a good coach, every place you go, every experience you have, you're kind of putting that in the database and you're adding to it. And that's frankly, that's to me, that's the brilliance of Andy Reid. When you watch the teams that Andy Reid had with McNabb in the early 2000s, it looked different than what McNabb was doing later in the decade. It looked different than what Vic was doing. It looked different than what Alex Smith was doing. It looked different than what Mahomes is doing. And I think a good coach continues to evolve with exposure to different players and different scenarios. And that's what Kellen Moore had with the Chargers last year.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. What did he say? First of all, you're not going to read a lot into an introductory press conference, and it is canned in a lot of ways. But what's your inside feel? Because you are an insider. What's your inside feel on how he works with Hurts? And this is a vital year for Hurts. I mean, look, he regressed last year. Now, we could talk about coaching, we could talk about other external factors, but how does he get Jalen playing like he played 2 years ago?
Yeah, so good question. And by the way, I think what you said there about the opening press conference is important to recognize. Kellen Moore in particular wasn't saying much. He was the canned answers. I actually found Vic Fangio to be refreshing. You ask him a direct question, he gives you a direct answer.
Because he doesn't care.
Like that.
Like he's like, I'm just. You learn that as you get older, right? Where you go, well, you know what, bleep it, I don't care. Like I'm just going to be as completely honest and forthright as possible because who cares, right? Like this is you love me or you hate me. I don't really give a damn.
Yeah, so as a reporter, you like that. You ask a direct question, you get a direct answer. To the question about Kellen Moore, I think that working with Jalen there's a few things there. First off, I think Kellen's experience as a quarterback in the league cannot be understated. As a high-level quarterback in college cannot be understated. And I think that he's going to try to do things to make it easier for Jalen pre-snap or I shouldn't say easier, to create more pre-snap for Jalen. You're going to see more motion, the use of play action. I think that Kellen Moore's background as a quarterback, and now I know Brian Johnson had a background with a quarterback, and Shane Steichen had backgrounds with quarterbacks, but Kellen Moore is what he's known for is quarterback-friendly systems, right? Is creating options for the quarterback, and I think it's going to be less burden, or it should be, with at least what they want, less burden on Jalen to have to be the Superman, so to speak, and more answers on every play, right? And that's what Kellen Moore's offenses were with the Cowboys. That's what they were supposed to be last year with the Chargers. That's what they need to be with the Eagles.
You're spot on. I see this. Here's the answer. I got the answer. And last year he played like a quarterback who just was swimming, who had no answers. I'm with you. All right, last thing. Let's play a little game. All right, because you are a student of Eagles history. So I'm going to give you a coordinator, all right, and you give me a quick summation or first word that comes to your mind.
Okay.
All right. Let's start off on the offensive side. I'll give you Rich Kotite.
I mean, the play sheet, right? The play sheet in the rain.
That's right. The chart.
That's what comes to mind.
The chart got wet.
Yep.
Gruden.
I see him in that Kelly Green starter jacket, but no, I'm thinking of working with Bobby Hoying, and I'm thinking of the Rodney Peete year '95. Randall goes down, and that great playoff win against the Lions that year when they put up 48 points or thereabouts.
Yeah. I think it was a 50 burger actually.
50,
okay,
yeah.
Brad Childress.
Brad Childress. So obviously he started as the quarterback coach for McNabb. I'm thinking with Childress, he's not calling the plays. That was the big thing there, right? And it was still Andy calling the plays.
He was also the run in Andy's ear. He would, because he was come from Wisconsin. He was always the guy that was like, "Hey man, let's not get away from the run." So I'll give you the opposite, Marty Morningway.
Yeah, first time Andy gave up play calling, right, was to Marty Morningweg, and then I started covering the team at the end of Marty, and so I got to know Marty a bit, and when I think of Marty, I think of him talking about Deshaun and LaShawn, right, and trying to distinguish between the two up on the podium.
Pat Shermer.
Yeah, so there's different eras of Pat, right? You knew Pat when he was the tight ends coach, and then you know. So I covered Pat when he was Chip's OC, and I liked Pat, but it was kind of it wasn't his offense, right? And so what I remember is every time talking to Pat, and it's kind of like. It's like, what are you doing? You're kind of like the figurehead, you know. This is Chip's show here. I'm asking him why they're doing X, Y, and Z, and it was Chip's show.
Frank Reich.
Yeah, so with Frank, what I'm thinking of is kind of like the father figure, if you will, to Carson and to Nick, like being behind the scenes there, the intermediary between so Doug's the head coach, Doug's calling the plays, but Frank's really doing a lot behind the scenes, just in terms of like the personality management with Carson and with Nick.
Mike Groh.
Mike Gross, yeah. So interesting. I covered Mike Groh when he was the offensive coordinator at Virginia, and that's when I first got to know Mike
under Al, his dad.
Yeah, exactly. I actually covered when he got fired by his dad. He was replaced by his dad. But with Mike Groh, I actually think that he was stepping into a tough shadow. Frank Reich was beloved, won the Super Bowl, but I always think when they brought in Golden Tate and he's saying that they're trying to they're having a hard time acclimating him into the offense.
Oh, that was horrible. Shane Steichen.
Yeah, Shane really taken over the play calling, and I got to know Shane quite a bit. And what I think of with Shane was the particulars of him as a play caller. I actually heard this good anecdote talking to Norv Turner, who's kind of his mentor. Norv Turner said that he always wrote the numbers of his best players on his play sheet just to remind him, you got to get this guy the ball. And that's what Shane used to do.
That's brilliant. That's a great nugget.
Yeah. So like during the games, he would look down, he would see 11, and he'd say, I got to get the ball to 11 right here.
I love that. Brian Johnson concludes the OCs.
Yeah, Brian Johnson. He was running Nick's offense last year, but I think of a season that lacked creativity, and he was the guy at the helm there. And frankly, I think of too many times when they were, running the ball in situations when those third and long runs, and whether it was Nick's call, whether it was Brian's call, that's what I think when you have Jalen Hurts. And you have A.J. Brown, you have Devontae Smith, and you're handing the ball in 3rd and 18.
Jim Johnson on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, just the respect that his players had for him, right? I didn't cover Jim, but I read all the coverage, and I was around the bit as like an intern at the Inquirer back then. And I just think, hearing the way Brian Dawkins talks about how Jim Johnson changed his career. And the same, you go on down the list, the reference, all those guys you knew really well, the reference that they spoke about Jim Johnson with.
Sean McDermott.
Yeah, I think about that Green Bay game. It's tough following Jim Johnson, of course, right? And
it's a lot like what happened, honestly, to Kellen Moore when he becomes the OC in Dallas, because those guys were his peers. Sean was the linebackers coach. He was like their peers. Like, so all of a sudden he had to replace him, and he was basically a lot of those guys' agents.
Well said. But I do remember actually talking to people back then, because I did some stuff on Carolina when he got that job as the DC, and it was interesting. He gets he leaves Philly, and everyone I spoke to in Philly, like to a man, was saying this guy's gonna be really good. Like don't don't write him off based on
uh-huh.
on the year he had. Yeah.
Yep. Juan Castillo.
Yeah. So with Juan, he was the first time I covered a defensive coordinator getting fired, and it happened mid-season. I remember it well. I actually remember I was supposed to go on a date the night that Juan Castillo got fired, and I had to cancel the date to do some Juan Castillo stories. I liked dealing with Juan, but it was short-lived. Honestly, what I think of with Juan is a great anecdote from my colleague, my former colleague, our friend Jeff McClain, who he calls Asante Samuel when Juan gets the job and asks for the reaction. And Asante says, "The O-line coach," right? Like just the disbelief in Juan getting that job.
Billy Davis.
Yeah, I heard you guys talking about it before. Overmatched in the sense that he didn't have the personnel and his defense was on the field quite a bit. But real nice guy.
He was. Jim Schwartz.
Yeah, I think one of the more underrated coaches in Eagles history. When I think of Jim Schwartz, like just total command for the way he wanted his scheme to run. I think of like he had a swagger and a confidence that I think led to his players. And honestly, I when I think of Jim Schwartz, I think of something that a former Eagle scout told me when he got hired, which was that read is a 4-letter word in Jim Schwartz's defense. You don't read, you just go. And that's the way that front seven or those front four played.
Gannon.
Yeah, Gannon, look, I know he's a polarizing figure in Philly. I think he was a smart coach. And I think when he had the personnel, he made it work. But honestly, when I think about their struggles against good quarterbacks in the first year, and also I would say had the Eagles known 2 weeks earlier that Gannon was considering leaving, or that was a candidate for that Arizona job, Vic Fangio would have been the coach last year.
And finally, Desai.
Yeah, short-lived. I think he got a raw deal, to be honest with you. And look, even if they were going to replace him at the end of the year, I think doing it when they did was a bad situation. It had a bad outcome, and I think it ended up hurting the team. So I think that, look, there were things behind the scenes in terms of like commanding the respect of the players, and I get that. But I thought, I think of the Miami game and the Kansas City game and a few of the other games when their defense probably outplayed expectations, and it clearly did not work with Matt Patricia.
I got to tell you, great stuff, man. A lot of fun, Zach. I know your book's going to be incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate this. I just want to tell your audience, check out the PHLY Eagle Show at 1:30 today. We're going to have Brandon Brooks in studio. It's going to be fun. So make sure you check that out.
Looking forward to that, buddy boy. Good stuff, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
We all silly like the mayor.